Hey guys, Coach Chris here, back on another video, picking up with Drew's round 2 game in the 2023 Kyle Weeks Memorial Tournament. He is an underdog here, playing Howard, and Howard opens with d4. Drew plays knight f6, knight f3, g6. Drew steers for a King's Indian. King's Indian is a nice repertoire choice. You basically only need one other opening with black, and that's something to play against e4. Against everything else, you can play King's Indian, so very practical repertoire choice from Drew. Howard plays bishop g5, bishop g7, knight bd2. So Howard is playing a Torre type of setup, and with knight bd2, he is hinting that he could play e4. He doesn't in this game, but for that reason, you can just castle here, and that's totally fine. But after e4, now you're playing more of a Pyrrhic. I don't know. I'm skeptical of allowing this big pawn center for white. Engine says you can survive this. I don't know. Maybe black can prove that the center's overextended. But to me, I don't know. I would shy away from that. I definitely would have gone e4 with white there, but Howard just goes e3, which is very sensible, preparing the development of the light squared bishop, solidifying the center, just playing a very solid, simple game. d6, a very King's Indian move, preparing c5 or e5. The knight can often come to b7 and then prepare those breaks further. Also keeps knights out of e5. Bishop d3. And in our last video, I talked at length about how in the London, the bishop belongs on d3 based on the pawn structure that we're actually going to get in this game. I could have done a better job of clarifying when bishop d3 is correct and when the bishop belongs on a different square. Against a normal London, when black would have a pawn on d5 and maybe c5, and the dark squared bishop is over on e7, for example, or d6, and there's no fianchetto pawn structure, then the bishop on d3 makes a lot of sense. It's pointing at the weak h7 square, fits in nicely with the pawn structure. Makes a lot of sense to have the bishop on that square. Here things are a bit different. Black has these pawns on light squares, and at the moment the bishop on d3 is just biting on granite. These pawns are very well protected. The bishop on d3 in this particular situation, with this kingside fortress that black has built, the bishop is not actually that great. So it's similar to a London pawn structure. We'll see that in a couple of moves we'll get a very similar London position just with a bishop on g5. Another thing that the bishop sort of invites with a pawn on d6, and this is going to come very naturally to King's Indian players, is to try to get in the break e5 and also threaten a fork on these two minor pieces. So for this reason, Engine likes bishop c4 the best here. Another way to play is just bishop e2, castle, and then c4, and then white just has a pretty comfortable, low risk King's Indian. But bishop d3 is played, rook e8, castles, e5. So really nice move from Drew. This is definitely the right plan. Not quite threatening e4 yet because we have to deal with this pin first. But it's definitely in the air. c3 from Howard. And, I like white's position quite a bit. It's nice and solid. Howard's not taking any risk here. Drew's position is perfectly fine. And here he plays h6. Engine is totally fine with this move. I would have preferred, especially, the way the game turns out, I would have preferred knight bd7 here. Engine says Drew's move is a bit better. This makes a bit more sense to me, though, because now, first, white needs to find a move. The most natural move to me looks like queen e2 or queen c2. Let's say e2 for example. Now when we play h6 and white takes, now we could recapture with the knight if we wanted to. And now we really are threatening to play e4. And we've sped up our development. We replaced the knight on f6 with our other knight, and white's bishop on g5 is gone. So Drew's move is fine, but after takes, Drew does need to be aware that white is going to have 3 pieces in play, and after Drew's recapture, bishop takes f6, the development disadvantage is starting to grow. It's not serious yet, black's still totally fine, but it is definitely something to keep an eye on. Queen f6, getting the queen off the back rank, seems more natural. The engine says is better, which makes sense, right? We're getting another piece off the back rank. We can, develop our bishop to some sensible squares. Then I can come to c6 or knight d7 after the bishop moves, and black is totally fine there. So bishop f6 feels like, in combination with h6, that we're starting to get a little looser on the king side. Now this bishop starts to make sense. After queen c2, white will have a nice battery, or after queen to b3, this pawn will be pinned, and the g6 pawn will be threatened. So black has some things to think about. White captures, which I'm not so sure about. Developing another piece seemed more natural, and if you're going to set up pawns on e3 and d3, typically you're doing that to support a strong point on d4, so then training it away doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Recapture, and now white sets up this battery attacking g6. Also clears the d file, so now a rook can come to the d file, lining up with our queen. And now again, white has 3 minors developed. We've got 1. The rook is better on e8. It's doing a fine job, but we need to develop. We need to develop quickly. We need to protect the king. We need to be mindful of white's threats. There's nothing super obvious yet, but it feels like it's coming. And Drew played b6 here. Typically you don't fianchetto both bishops. You often don't have time to do that. It's often not the most optimal setup. And it doesn't really address the d-file pressure that's coming and the potential kingside attack that might be coming. So it's a bit slow. Rook ad1, and now bishop b7. And Drew just doesn't have time for this. Drew waited until after bishop c4 to move the queen, but already in this position, the engine points out this really cool line. So bishop takes g6 is already good to go. And the reason is after takes with check, bishop drops back to block the check. The reason this works for white is that knight e4 comes with tempo. The rook is hitting that queen. Just real quick, let's see what happens if bishop takes e4. Just recapture. Okay. I hadn't looked at the counterattack before turning on the camera, so it doesn't work. So queen e7, and now the knight comes in to f6 with check, and if, for example, queen takes, then that drops the rook on e8. So bishop takes g6 was already good to go, and it makes sense because white knows that he's going to have a tempo on the queen. These pieces are still, the knight and the rook are not developed. The bishop is developed, but isn't really addressing the pressure on the king side and the pressure on the d-file. So it makes sense that there would be a tactic here. Howard played bishop c4 though, which is still very dangerous. And the threat is that the f7 pawn is pinned to the king, it cannot recapture, and so queen takes g6 as a threat. Drew also needed to get his queen off the d-file, and so played queen e7, and that just drops the g6 pawn. And after this, the game really is over. Drew continues to fight. We've seen Drew have some miraculous saves in the past, and no one ever saved a game by resigning, so it was absolutely the right thing to do to keep fighting and keep trying. But White's play is just too natural and too fast in this position. So the knights come in. Look at these minor pieces. It's just too much for the black position to handle after the weakening h6, and now that the g6 pawn is gone. So White converts without too much drama, and here Drew resigned. After bishop c4, Engine says that king g7 is the right move, which makes a lot of sense. It deals with the pin, adds an extra defender to g6. And here, it's tough because knight e4 is coming with another tempo on the queen, and, black isn't dead yet, but it's tough. So, takeaways from this game. King's Indian is definitely a very practical repertoire choice. It's not really in King's Indian style. This is more of a Grunfeld, but this is something you can consider if you don't want White to build a big center. I think Drew absolutely goes for the right e5 plan here. I would have liked to see knight bd7 developing another piece. I understand that the engine likes h6, but if we play h6, then White is almost certainly going to take, and it would be nice to be able to take that to recapture with another piece. So here, I really think queen takes f6 is in order because it develops another piece. Again, I don't like that capture on the e5 square. Now, the way the game went, it made a lot of sense because White was able to gain time on the queen, but releasing the tension after you've tried to set up a strong point on d4 doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And then here, alarm bells need to be going off. There's a lot of pieces aimed at our king, and there's d-file pressure coming. The engine's choice of knight bd7 makes a lot of sense. We're blocking some d-file pressure. The knight can come over to help out. That could look something like bishop g7, knight f6, for example. And Drew, I just don't think had time for b6. And once we see this alignment issue, we need to address it. I am a big believer in the saying, don't be afraid of ghosts, calculate. And if you don't see a direct threat, then, play the move you wanted to play. However, these pieces can move away so quickly with tempo that the sense of danger needs to be a little bit more honed here. So, up until move 13, Drew was playing a very reasonable, very solid game. It was just that one moment, and White capitalized. And that's how chess goes, man. It's brutal. One blunder can do it. And so a good effort from Drew, good fight, and it was a well-played game from Howard. So thanks for watching. Keep grinding those tactics. I'll see you in the next video.